minutes, you will hear a keynote address, a presentation, and a panel discussion on the subject. Before we get started, I request the panelists and key speakers to come on stage for a brief photograph. Thank you, speakers and panelists. Oh, this one is.
Do you want us up there on the stage before we start?
I think the presentation would require you to sit here, so Joshua can do his remarks, and then all of you can come back up.
Okay, you'll just announce us.
Yes, I'll announce you up.
Thank
you.
you so much for doing this.
No problem. And now, without much ado, I invite Turing Award-winning computer scientist, Professor Joshua Bengio, to deliver his opening remarks and set the tone for this session. Professor Bengio is the scientific director of Law Zero, the founder of Mila Kuback AI Institute, and the chair of the International AI Safety Report. Over to you, Professor Bengio.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to the Oxford Martin AI Governance Initiative and the Center for the Governance of AI for this chance to talk to you all on a subject of great importance for a lot of people, of labor market resilience. And I hear that we will converge to having companies share usage data that's going to help us study this issue. So that's fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Just put things in perspective, last August, 71% of respondents to a US survey said they were concerned that AI will be putting too many people out of work permanently. So this is one of the most sensitive topic for a lot of people. In January, another poll showed that more than a quarter of UK workers were worried their jobs could disappear in the next 5 years as a result of AI. We've also heard leaders of frontier AI companies saying this technology could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs in the next 1 to 5 years, or even every white-collar job by the end of 2027. I think that's pretty short, but even if it was 2 or 3 or 5 years later, that's really a huge change. Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but this is exactly why we need to study these questions scientifically, so that there'll be real incentives for governments to mitigate what can happen, in particular for those who will be hardest hit by those impacts. Even if we don't know exactly how AI capabilities are going to evolve in the future, some of the scenarios, basically the trend continuing, show that many jobs will be replaced. And so based on the precautionary principle, policymakers should really prepare for these risks. So I'm going to say a few words about what the International AI Safety Report that I chaired mentions about this question of labor impact. The report is supported by 29 countries, the EU, OECD, and the UN, and involves 100 international experts. It's making a synthesis of the science behind the question of emerging risks in the most advanced AIs, as well as their mitigation. And so the report notes that around 60% of jobs in advanced economies and 40% in emerging economies are exposed, in other words, at risk for what's coming with general purpose AI. But that the impacts will depend on how AI capabilities develop. As I said, there's uncertainty about this, and how institutions respond, which is why we're having those discussions, because we can still steer the future in a direction that will be good for people. Of course, there are disagreements about how fast the capabilities of AI will grow. But if, even if they come slower than what some of those predictions are, the stakes are so high for people in the world. We need to start thinking about this. Also, we have to think about this globally, because the adoption, the productivity gains will vary across countries, sectors, occupations, and tasks. So we see already some specific areas where the demand is reduced because of automation, and of course others like machine learning expertise where the need is increasing. But I don't think that the people who used to be, let's say, translators or answering service requests will turn into machine learning researchers. So it's not so simple. If you look at how different economists predict different futures regarding the labor impact, usually the reason why they disagree is because they disagree on how fast AI capabilities will grow. Some, at one extreme, think that AI has achieved the maximum that it could, and in that scenario, of course, the impact will be fairly minor. But I think it's plausible that the trends we've seen in the last 5 years will continue, in which case the impact will be major, and some economists go for that possibility. But really, we should be agnostic about this, and we should prepare in case the trends continue. So there are more and more studies piling up showing an effect. For example, declining employment for early career workers in the most AI-exposed occupations. And the other thing is, there's a delay between AI having the capability of doing a task and the markets and society absorbing that capability and actually replacing more and more jobs for doing these things. And then there's also a delay for studying these phenomena by economists and others to inform public policy, which also takes time. So the problem is the speed at which these things are happening. So the other thing to keep in mind is power dynamics, because, well, people who lose their job will be worse off. At the same time, automation is going to make some people much richer. Who? Well, the people who own those machines, the people who, the companies that are designing those most advanced models. And those advanced models, where are they? Well, mostly in 2 countries in the world. So there's a real risk of all kinds of inequities growing, both within each country, depending on the sector in which you are, but between countries. And these global inequalities should be the subject of international coordination and discussions like we're having at the summit here. So access, either control of these most advanced AIs or access to the most advanced AI is going to become a decisive competitive advantage. Countries without reliable access would be facing a dual disadvantage. At the same time, struggling to generate wealth nationally and needing to support a growing number of unemployed workers. So that could be a real fiscal crisis for some countries. And right now, each country is looking at this in their own way, in a fragmented approach. I think that the only way we're going to be able to face this is with a lot more coordination internationally. Countries need to form alliances with others with shared situations, economic prospects, similar values, security needs, complementary strengths, so that they together have a better chance of helping to steer AI in a direction that's going to be, as the title of the conference says, good for the people, good for everyone. I want to mention, as an example of this, last week, Germany and Canada signed an agreement to work together on developing AI that will be ethical and safe. And so we need this kind of thing to happen much more. And so we need the sort of dialogues that we're going to have today here. I look forward to hearing the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your address, Professor Bengio. You've given us all a lot to think about. I now request Bharat Chandar, an economist at the Stanford Digital Economy Lab, to deliver a short presentation on the subject.
Thank you all very much. I'm just going to start by recapping what the research shows about AI and labor markets, and I hope that'll be a useful starting point for the panel discussion to come. Okay, looks like you can see this. So let's just start by talking about how AI exposure has been associated with employment changes over the past few years. So this is recapping some research that I did with Eric Brynjolfsson and Ryu Chen. Oh, okay. So we were asking, are we already seeing changes in the labor market driven by AI? This is going to be in the United States. There's been a lot of discussion about how AI might be impacting the labor market, especially for entry-level workers. To study this, we collected payroll records for millions of workers through December 2025. And the results that we found are, after accounting for other macroeconomic forces, our preferred estimate is that there's been a 16% relative decline in employment for young workers and jobs that are more exposed to AI. That started around late 2024, early 2025, and we haven't seen a reversal since then. We have not seen nearly as much impact for more experienced workers. Perhaps some that's occurring more recently, but overall we've seen a pretty concentrated impact on young workers here. We've also considered other alternatives that might explain some of this, in particular interest rate changes. And it turns out that interest rate exposure gives very different predictions about labor market impacts compared to AI exposure. Now, we don't have a clean experiment for studying how AI is impacting the labor market, but we think these are important facts to document as we track this going forward. So that was how AI exposure relates to employment outcomes, and we found that it predicts declines in employment. But what about AI adoption? So this is new work that I'm doing with Belka Klein-Tieselink at King's College in London. And here we want to look at firm adoption of AI. So exposure is more about technical feasibility of automation, but adoption is about actual implementation in the economy. And the driver for exposure is more about AI model capabilities, whereas about adoption is more about return on investment, regulation, culture, and costs. So in this new work, we measure firm level adoption across 40 plus countries using online job postings. And we want to study how this relates to employment changes. So just to give you an idea of where we see adoption globally, you see some countries that are leading the pack here, including Israel, Japan. India is pretty high up there as well. So this lines up with other research as well on where we're seeing adoption. And we've also seen very rapid adoption over time. So that's driven by the information sector in particular, and we see this across countries as well. So I think the important question here is, how does that relate to employment? And let me put that in the context of the broader research that's been done on this topic. Overall, we find this interesting dichotomy between work that studies how exposure relates to employment changes and how adoption relates to employment changes. The work that looks at exposure has overwhelmingly found that exposure predicts declines in employment, whereas the work on adoption has found very mixed results. On net, it probably comes out to about a null effect on employment changes. And so I think there's a important question about why we get different results here. And I think this relates to the topic of this session about why we need better data to study these questions. So let me talk about what data we need to try to figure out what's going on here and why we get such different results. So one explanation for this is that even before adoption, firms anticipate that they may not need as much headcount. And so because of that, they reduce their hiring in anticipation of current and future AI. And there's some survey evidence that actually suggests that this is the case. Another potential idea here is that we are measuring adoption very poorly. And one example of that is nearly half of AI usage at work is on personal accounts. It's not on enterprise products. And so if we measure it this way, we're not going to do a good job of measuring the impacts of adoption on employment. Another possibility here is competition. Non-adopters could lose market share and shrink. There's some evidence that that's what happened with industrial robots, and maybe we're seeing something like that with AI as well. And then the fourth option is that we're just capturing other things that are going on in the economy, and so we're actually not doing a good job of measuring the impact of AI either on the adoption side or on the exposure side. And so we need better data to tease through each of these four different possibilities. For anticipation, we need to collect better data on beliefs about AI and employment. So how are executives thinking about future AI capabilities, and how is that impacting their employment decisions today? We need better firm-level usage data to get better measurement of adoption. And we need better measurement of productivity effects of AI so that we can get a better idea of how much competition is driving some of these forces as well. Now, the other option is that all these changes that we've documented are being driven by other factors that are happening in the economy. And unfortunately, I know that this isn't that satisfying, but ultimately the best evidence will just come with more time. If we see these trends continue and we don't see any reversal in those trends, that's going to be suggestive, quite suggestive, that it's actually being driven by AI over time. So with that, I wanted to just give you all a recap of the research in this space, and hopefully that'll lead into the panel discussion.
Thank you, Bharat, for that enlightening presentation. May I request you to take a seat here? May I also request our esteemed panelists to join us on the stage, please? Joining us today is Dr. Shamika Ravi, a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, Ambassador Philip Thigo, who serves as the Special Envoy for Technology in the Republic of Kenya, Hector D. Rerwa, who is the Director of Public Policy at Microsoft's Office of Responsible AI, Bharat Chandar, who you just heard from, and Pamela Mishkin, who is an independent researcher currently working at OpenAI. Moderating the session is Robert Traeger, the Director of Oxford Martin AI Governance Initiative and the International Governance Lead at the Center for Governance of AI. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much to the speakers and also to the panelists for joining us. So I think we're really set up for an excellent discussion today. And we'll start, Shamika, with you, if I may. So I think there's a study that's almost 2 years old now that says that 92% of knowledge workers in India use AI in their work. So how does India plan to use AI to augment jobs while also transitioning those who are negatively affected?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, India does have one of the highest adoptions if you look at firm-level data. There is a great degree of openness, but also optimism in terms of what AI can achieve. We still don't quite know what is it going to do to productivity in terms of measurement. But the signs for a country like India appear to be one where, you know, because we have last mile connectivity issues when it comes to many aspects of the labor market, particularly if you look at services like health, education, its application, the chances are it's likely to be used for a lot of traditional problems solving. In fact, I don't know how many of you in the room know that the fastest growing sectors in India are agtech, fintech, health tech, ed tech, and which are all solving very old traditional problems by adoption of technology for existing problems. So there is reason to believe that the exposure is high, but there is good reason to believe that it will lead to a better outcome for citizens as a whole, and the labor market is also likely to adapt in accordance.
Thank you. I'll turn next to Ambassador Tigo. So I think that there's a paper by the World Economic Forum that says that 52% of jobs in Kenya could be automated. And there's certainly also the possibility of new kinds of work being created. But how do you see the possibilities for different stakeholders, especially frontier AI companies, to help governments in improving their understanding and transitioning affected workers?
Thanks so much. And I think for us, is to understand it's 52% of what? So it's 52% of 15%. Because only 15% of our economy is formal. So that's really the number they're looking at. A majority is informal. And so I think for me, that's really the potential. Like India, we are looking at areas that were previously underdeveloped in terms of the labor market and labor economy. So food, if you look at the food systems and the food system plug, farm to come, farm to fork, farm to plate, farm to bottle. So we see that as potential AI opportunity. Of course, the second part of around artificial intelligence is the potential to make small and medium enterprises exponential. And we've seen it in the case of fintech, for example, agtech, or the same as India, where we're seeing companies that were previously would require almost 100 employees now doing almost 10 employees and being very exponential. It's no surprise that Kenya right now, because it's the largest VC destination in the continent, because we're seeing those types of investments going into the country. What can governments do? I think potentially there's actually a potential for a regulatory challenge, and government should always look at how does regulation enable efficiencies and productivity, but also having the sufficient guardrails. And my team is part of Yoshua's report, and that's what we're looking at. So potentially looking at what can we do, understanding the potential of AI, but also ensuring that we have enough guardrails. I think the second point is understanding the AI stack. When you talk about labor, it's also the understanding where the value goes ultimately, because currently, I don't know if you've seen the data, Kenya is the #1 user of ChatGPT, right? But it doesn't mean anything in terms of labor or productivity. So I think for us is also to understand that how do people make beneficial use of technology in a way that delivers economic dividend, economic value. So I think that's where we really need governments to step in.
Thank you. Bharat, I'll turn to you next. You've presented some data, I think, all of it interesting, the impact on young people, which is very dear, I think, to all of us, is some of the most interesting, let's say. I believe that data was for the United States, and so I'm curious if you are in a position to tell us or perhaps speculate a little bit about impacts elsewhere in the world.
Thank you. Yes, so the data that I presented was primarily about the United States. There is some research that has been done on the UK, but for the most part, we really don't know very much about what's going on in other countries, and that was why, like I discussed, we're collecting this data now about AI adoption in other countries and how it's impacting employment there. But unfortunately today, we just don't know very much about what's happening in other countries because the data hasn't been collected.
Yeah. No speculating.
If I were to speculate, I mean, I do think there are a lot of jobs in places like India and the Philippines that people have traditionally thought might be more susceptible to AI. Now, I do want to say that we have uncertainty about the future because historically, there have always been new jobs that are created and people have shifted across the economy to other jobs that are growing in demand. And I think the question is AI going to be different from what we've seen in the past, or is it going to be similar to what we saw previously with prior technologies? And I think there's a lot of uncertainty about that, in part because the capabilities are progressing so quickly that will AI be able to do a lot of the new work that's created as well? And I think that's really where the uncertainty lies here.
Thank you for answering the follow-up question. Much appreciated. I think I'll turn now to Hector and ask you, you're at Microsoft, and Microsoft has published a paper measuring the applicability of generative AI to occupations and associated data with that. And so I'm interested how you see the future of data sharing by companies and the uses that governments can make of that.
You hear me? Yeah. Thanks, Robert, and thanks for inviting Microsoft on this panel. It's a topic that we've known for a time. Our colleagues at LinkedIn since 2014 have been publishing what they call the economic graph. The economic graph is a privacy-preserving map which basically provides some index on the global labor market. And so they turn aggregated signals into practical insights for policymakers, describe hiring trends, but also like labor shortage in certain sectors, etc. And it has been a really useful tool for policymakers, whether it's at the government level, but also regions, states, cities, municipalities, etc. are now all using these tools. And I think we need similar economic graphs for AI diffusion. I would say there are two strong prerequisites to do this well, and this starts with measurement discipline. I remember the paper in 2013 from Frey and Osborne, published by Oxford, which was basically stating that 50% of the jobs in the US were at a high risk of being automated by AI. I think that the mistake that these two researchers made, that they were actually looking at the jobs and occupations and not at jobs as a basket of tasks that are different from one another. And so we really need to start with measurement discipline and try to build this shared evidence on where AI is used, how it's adopted, but also where gap persists, whether it's skills, infrastructure, language, coverage, trust, to try to mitigate these gaps. I think the second important thing is methodologies. And this is where the right norm to build these kind of tools, Robert, is privacy-preserving telemetry. So basically, what scales across countries is a small set of repeatable, aggregated indicators, anonymized, taxonomized, and comparable over time. So government and institutions can actually steer skilling policies in the right direction. So now coming to our work with consumer copilots. So we published a usage report for 2025, which analyzed 37.5 million of conversations, excluded education accounts. And so basically we were using machine classifiers, not human researchers, to read the user content. And so this system extracts high-level summaries rather than relying on raw personal text, so we can learn about patterns, basically, without learning about individual situations. You can all access it on the web. And this research really focuses on why context matter for labor market signals. So on mobile, for instance, those of you who use consumer copilots, it's interesting, but on your phone, you actually use it for health uses. On your devices, you mainly focus on work, technology, and career advices. And so the split is exactly, I think, where policymakers need to lean in. It's just not whether AI is used, but where in daily life and work it's being integrated. And so for labor market impact, the right unit is really tasks. It's not job titles. And so the Copilot framework labels each conversation by topic. So what it's about, and also like incorporating the intents, for example, searching for information versus seeking advice, which is, I think, a very practical way to observe whether AI is being used for augmentation versus end-to-end automation. And how it, of course, varies by role, sector, company, etc. And so I guess, this first report is a useful tool for economists. It shows when and how people are using Copilot. And generally speaking, I think each lab holds a part of the information here, a part of the labor market usage signals. And so here I want to call out the World Bank work on building a Gen AI usage index, aggregating all these signals. I think, Ambassador, you will agree with me if I say that it's useful for you to have GDP kind of figures rather than financial reporting. And so that's actually what companies such as mine have been contributing to. Why it matters. I think we published the AI diffusion reports earlier this year, and it shows that across the global population, 1 individual by 6 is actually using Gen AI, which is a good thing. The problem is the divide between the global north and the global south, where we have 24% of the working adult population in the global north using these AI tools versus 14% in the global south. And this gap is only widening. So I think this is why these conversations and these efforts are so helpful.
Thank you, Hector. Pamela, I'll turn now to you. So you're in industry and you've done research on these exact topics. So I'm curious how you see the things that, let's say, global South countries can do now to get smarter on the sorts of data and analyses that need to be done to mitigate labor market impacts.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Pamela. I think the first thing I'll call attention is this kind of like with this word resilience, because I think that resilience really isn't about, predicting the future might be like one part of it, but it's primarily about like how do we sort of plan for all possible scenarios and all possible situations. And it's kind of thing where like you don't wait for a flood forecast to build levees, you sort of start to plan for like what if that happens. And I think it's important because if we sort of like wait for this kind of like usage data to show something and to like understand exactly what we should predict from it, it might be too late to actually sort of like proactively plan for what a sort of just transition looks like for workers. I think it's not only about like, does long-term equilibrium look okay? Are there more jobs in the end? It's really what does that period of transition look like? Because that's something that's like quite consistent throughout history, that like transitions are really hard. Losing your job is really hard. Your job changing also is really difficult. So I think like one thing that sticks out to me is just sort of choosing 2 to 3 concrete workflows that really matter locally and measuring them and distilling from that data about like what we really want these tools to look like and how we want them to impact workers. So that might look like something like public service delivery, BPO, customer support, or like healthcare worker support, things that we think also like look very different in the global South context than they do in the US, for instance. And so in those contexts, can we sort of measure the impact of AI and really say, like, given that, what is like likely to happen and what is the sort of predictive validity we should attach to things like usage data for the different kinds of impact that it might have? Because just like saying people are using this in a context, and I'll maybe say more about this in my second question, but it doesn't really tell us, is it substituting? Is it actually delivering productivity gains? But if we do these kind of like detailed studies, not just on places where we're like worried about work, but also where like the tools could have real power to deliver better support and better services for people, I think we'll like end up seeing a lot more. And this is like, and I think it's like important to focus on these places where global South use is probably likely very different than the US use. So one instance is in healthcare delivery. In the US, there's sort of lots of regulation that exists around like who can deliver what kind of healthcare at different points of service. If you're in a context where that doesn't happen, I think the power of AI to actually drastically improve outcomes for people is much higher. And so actually measuring that and sort of figuring out how to put the tools in the hands of people to realize those positive impacts is a lot more important. And also that data can then be used to actually train better systems and like be much more deterministic about how you want the world to look, rather than kind of like responding to the data that the companies will give you. One example of that, I think also like usage data is, the questions we want to ask about usage data is not just like how is this being used or like how is the tool being used, but also how is the usage data being used? And so how do you sort of like keep more of those questions in the hands of the global South to ask? I think it's important.
Great, thank you. So Ambassador Tigo, Kenya has launched the Kenya Artificial Intelligence Skilling Alliance, which it says is focused on skills development, innovation, opportunity creation, and policy collaboration. Could you tell us a little bit about how it decides where to focus its efforts for reskilling and opportunity creation?
So I think a couple of things, and Kaisa, I think in our view was very much to understand that industry still continues to lead in the development of these models. So I think the first premise is that industry needs to advise government and the entire ecosystem where this technology is going. As much as it's unpredictable, at least we know some foundational elements don't change. And so I think one is how do companies make investments? Secondly, how do companies reimagine the entire workforce of the workplace? We know now for sure that CIOs don't talk to CTOs, don't talk to CEOs, don't talk to CFOs. So the labor market is kind of broken in terms of the industry level, but also we've had challenges traditionally around leadership, whether it's CEO level, C-suite level, or board level. So we've been having serious issues around transition even before AI created this disruption. So I think for us is to understand how to reimagine and re-engineer industry itself. And when I say industry, it includes governments, it includes private sector. So it's civil society, so it's and research institutions and education institutions. So I think for us, we are looking at it as an entire whole of country approach to this. The second part, of course, is, and this is something that I think the AI usage data speaks to, is the currently in the global south, we really have broken labor market information systems. That's why you can't find data. Simply because I think that there's been years of disinvestment in the labor market and the data that advises jobs. We can't give job reports like the way the US does. So part of our understanding now is how do you, using AI and using these capabilities, begin to create capabilities around data to understand the labor market as much as it's nuanced, as much as it's changing. I think without data, you cannot necessarily do anything. The third part, of course, is the investments in people. And that's what I think Kaisa does, is how do you have the long-term investments, but also understanding you need to reskill and upskill, but also understand you need to create a safety net. And again, the World Bank, and you're right. So we're talking World Bank around social protection, around potential job disruptions of older populations. So for Kenya, for example, we have an anomaly, median age of 20, and then an aging population of 60. So if I look at sectors, food sector, 60 years old farmers. And you have techies who are the innovators who need to innovate around the food system. So I think for us, that's what we're trying to do at Kaisa, is manage all these problems, but also understand that you have a society that is part of this transition, whether they're 20 years old or 75 years old.
Yeah, thank you. Shamika, so India has recently established a high-powered standing committee on education to employment to audit the impact of AI on jobs. So we've been talking a lot about data and the data that governments could get from companies. What's your view? What data is needed in order to make these decisions effectively?
So, you know, partly the kind of digitization efforts that have been happening within companies such as Naukri.com, you know, which are basically placement agencies, the search cost has fallen very significantly on account of this kind of a matching value which is created. What we are going to see is that so far the government has not gotten into those aspects of the labor market. You're going to see the government increasingly get into that. But I think there are far more, again, fundamental problems such as low skills. It's not, and I think technology has definitely a very important role to play there. I think AI solutions will be very helpful, but we are yet to see fundamental replacements for basic education, you know, basic cognitive capabilities. And I think their AI tools will be, you know, incredibly helpful. We have in many parts of the country acute shortage of teachers. Quality of education remains a critical concern. And similarly, of course, even in healthcare, we do have acute shortage of doctors as well as nurses, of medical practitioners, paramedics. So I think, you know, the general belief now is that we have to get the education sector AI ready. We have to get our human resources, which is young population. The median age in India is 28 point something. And I was looking at Bharat's results. It's the young people who tend to get displaced first. But you also have a great degree of openness, and the probability of adoption also is related to age. So in a lot of these results, beyond the averages, I think we will have to look at the distribution itself. And the distribution is still a work in progress. And I think as we begin to collate and put a lot of this data together, I think we will have to do some kind of a Baumol cost disease analysis for every sector of the economy, because that's the kind of impact we are likely to see.
All right, thanks so much. So I have quite a few other questions here, but we'd also like to open it up to the audience for questions today. And we have a couple of people with microphones who will be going around. So maybe just while we're waiting, I see a number of hands, but the microphone will get, oh, okay. Great. Yes, in the back.
Hi. So, I mean, there's a conundrum which I would like, the panel to solve. So either it's frontier tech or it's jobs, right? But the role of economic planners, and we've seen that in the past, all the contemporary tech. In case of Singapore, they managed frontier tech as well as jobs. In case of India banking system, we manage computers as well as, the jobs. In case of UK, when the mechanical carriages arrived, the then frontier tech, we could see that the role of economic planners, when they do not do it properly, disrupts the entire ecosystem. Now, in case of India, we've done that pretty good with the digital public infrastructure. So the questions are three-pronged. One is for Shamika ma'am, that how can India depart its DPI efforts to the global south, which needs such economic planning sophistication efforts. Second is to Oxford Martin, how do you all plan to take on such initiatives? And third is to Bharat, that what research is there on this particular front, that the role of economic planners, especially in the global south, increases. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Right, so the two folks on my right, Shamika, do you want to start?
After the G20 meetings of 2023, there were 60 countries that put up expressions of interest to adopt some version of India's DPI, right? Whether it was Aadhaar, whether it was the UPI, etc. There is, and almost, of course, all of them were from the global south, barring Japan. So there is already a great deal of effort which is underway in terms of expanding this. But I think, again, based on the larger question that you're asking, it reminds me of a conversation that happened in the Indian Parliament, I think 15 years back, when the finance minister at that point said, what are you talking about? A poor woman in a village using a cell phone to make a payment, right? And here we are. I mean, it happened a lot faster than we anticipated. So I think, thankfully, now within the government, there is a great deal of not just an openness, I would not say great understanding still, because I think that's still a work in progress. But there is a certain degree of humility that we do not understand many aspects of this technology and what it's likely to do. And I think that's a great place to start.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the primary roles that government plays right now in the modern economy is acting as a social safety net for people who face various challenges, whether those are economic or otherwise. And I think part of what we need to think about today is, are the social safety nets that we have developed, whether in developing countries or elsewhere, are well suited for potential job impacts that we might see with AI? And in addition to that, they also play an important role in education. And I think there's an enormous opportunity there, as Shamika was mentioning earlier, to use AI as a tool for education, where people can upskill towards the types of work that becomes increasingly demanded in the economy going forward. And I think that's a very underdeveloped area where we could do a lot more work to help people adjust going forward.
Great. Who is next? Somebody should have a microphone. I can't see.
Should I pick somebody, or should I just?
Yes, I think so. Okay. Let's go right over here.
Yeah, just want to understand, since we have various countries have a different culture to follow, and when AI comes into the picture for basic educations, so how we are balancing that, considering the fact AI has major other impacts as well, demonstrating the data. So how exactly it will be impacting so that it can be democratized among various cultural aspects of different countries. Like India has a very different culture than US. So how we can incorporate the culture which US is following can be coming here in India as well.
Yeah.
Or how we'll be balancing.
That's a great question. Who would like to take that? Maybe Hector, Tigo, both of you I'm sure will have and you can talk about the multilingual evaluations also.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the answer basically. I think a lot of us now are looking to build around local language models. Of course, not every country can do it, but I think part of what we're looking at, if you come into the African continent, is larger collaboration, because a lot of these languages kind of spread across. We have colonial borders, but the people are spread across countries. So I think this is something that a lot of us are doing it. Second part, of course, is, again, and you said it, it's about training and building local talent, because when you build local talent and local training, then you have culture and context in the models. And I think for us, that's something that we're looking at. And it's not saying we shouldn't collaborate or cooperate with other cultures, because again, we have a global culture. So I think I like to separate that. Build locally, have local context, but also be interoperable with global context.
Thank you. Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about the drive to have multilingual, multicultural evaluations and model generation?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. And if you look at the pre-training phase of an AI model, we use a technique called web crawling technique, where basically I crawl data on the web that is available. And 40% of the data that we crawl as an industry, not only Microsoft, is English data, basically. And so we definitely have room for improvement on two sides. One side is simple performance, to be honest, like how an AI model is supposed to be performing well in a diversity of languages. If we're relying only on 2-3 languages in the pre-training phase, that's an issue. But also from a safety perspective, and that's where I relate very much with the point you've made on culture and context. Like, if you translate safety benchmarks, for instance, from one language to another, you lose the context in which these safety benchmarks were built. And so it's so important to do this work with communities in different countries to forge these safety tools and safety evaluations in Hindi, in Tamil. And that's what, so many interesting organizations are doing right now, including ML Commons, including Serai at IIT Madras. And so this is a critical topic for multilingual capabilities as a whole, not only performance.
Yeah, maybe I'll just quickly mention on that, and I think those of you who'd like to speak, raise your hands, and then Nick, you can pick somebody. And in the meantime, I'll just mention that I think there was a striking example that Kalika Bali used yesterday, where she said that in India now, it is not permissible to know the sex of a newborn baby before it's born, but now anybody can load a sonogram that they get into ChatGPT and find that out. So that is a really, I think, nice example of the sort of things that we need to be careful about. We need to be sensitive to cultures. I mean, that is simply one example among countless, but this is, I think, really a challenge, absolutely. Good, so who is our next question? Please.
Well, I have a very specific question, is which red line did you note that should be applied to the labor topic in order to guarantee labor resilience?
Which red lines apply to the labor topic? That is an interesting one. Would anybody like to take that?
Yeah, I think anyone who says they know the answer to that is probably lying. And it's in part because it's just a very economic, culturally dependent thing, and a lot of these issues are very different, not even just country to country, but block to block. If we think about different states in India, education is going to look totally different. But I do think that it's useful to do some detailed scenario planning of what is the most extreme kind of thing we could think about happening, and what are the sort of more median things. And doing this across sectors as well is quite interesting. And then in the face of each of those scenarios, what would we do? And I think that what often happens when you do this exercise is that a lot of the solutions look very similar across different things. Fixing our social safety net isn't something that we only want to do in the case of widespread unemployment. It might be something we want to do earlier, or might be something that we want to sort of have clear trigger conditions and not that sort of phase in over time. And so I realize I didn't entirely answer your question, but I think that part of it is that we can prepare for the worst without necessarily knowing that we'll end up there. And often that's easier also to reach agreement on. If you're sort of framing these things as this is a far-fetched thing that might never happen, it's easier to get us to sort of agree of okay, well, in the case of that happening, here are all the things that we'd agree to do.
So I think, unfortunately, it's my job to slowly bring the panel to a close. We've heard really, I think, partly worrying, if we're honest, and partly inspiring things from all the panelists to whom we are very grateful, and we'll thank them in a minute. But one thing that they certainly all agree on is the need for data and the need for governments to be able to respond to labor market impacts. And there are interesting and subtle reasons for that, and there are also sort of really obvious reasons for that. You know, when you talk to governments around the world about how they're going to respond, usually the word reskilling is very prominent. And reskilling programs actually don't always have a great track record of success. Sometimes they can be effective, but they haven't always been in the past. But how are we going to do reskilling if we can't answer the question, reskilling to what? It was just a few years ago, I think now, seems almost a lifetime, but a few years ago, I think we were all telling our nieces and nephews that they should really get into coding. And that was the main thing, you know. And now, of course, we know that probably before any other job is automated, it may be the job of coders. So certainly, as was very helpfully pointed out, I think we need a certain amount of humility here, but we really need to figure these things out, and to do that, we really need data. Maybe I can just mention that there seems to be a collaboration between the Indian government and companies, perhaps to announce later this week that the companies will be sharing usage data on models and committing to do that. So I think that is a great first step, something that we hope will continue. We hope the companies will coordinate so that they can share data which can be pooled, and thereby researchers gain an overall picture of what is happening in the economy. But I think some reasons to hope there, and some of the folks on this panel, although maybe they aren't taking full credit, have been deeply involved in those efforts. With that, I think it's my job to say, please join me in thanking this excellent panel.